How to cut an angle, not an angel. So I have this handle for my Robot style frame saw that I want to cut out. Now I could come in with a turning saw and slowly cut out this whole thing, but because this is almost 2-inch thick white oak, that would take a lot of time and be a pain. But what I can come in and do is make a bunch of relief cuts, which I have drawn out with all these extra lines on here. And I can remove most of the waste and then knock out the large chunks with a chisel and get in close to where I want to be in my shape. The problem with that is several of the cuts are actually on this weird angle, and that becomes a problem. We're very commonly used to putting this in a vise and making a straight, long rip cut, or doing that on a saw bench, or cutting across either on a bench hook or in your vise, and that's fairly straightforward. But how do we actually do these? It's a pain to pick up the saw and then turn it to hold it at that angle to make sure it's a cut. So let's actually dive into this and see some things that we can do. Now the first and easiest thing is actually, if I want to cut this line, I'm going to put that line vertical, and I'm just going to kind of sight it down and make sure that it's where I want it and get it ready to go. And I can pick up my saw, and I will just set my fingers over here and let it ride along my thumbnail. So I can set it in here, line it up, and I can make the cut straight down. And now it's just a regular cut. And I'd say about 90 to 95% of all the angled cuts you need to make, you can make by just rotating the piece in the work so that the cut line is now vertical. But there are some times when you just can't do that, and you have to cut something at a weird angle. So let's make this like there. So that's not quite 45, it's off by a little ways. And I'm going to do it the exact same way. I'm going to start with my thumbnail on there, line it up on the cut, and I'm just going to nick it to start it. I want to get a place for the saw blade to start in. So once I have made my trough cut, that first stroke off there, I can put my saw teeth in there, and now I can turn it whatever angle I want. Now if I keep my saw vertical, straight up and down, I'm off of my line. But what I can do is I can turn the saw until it lines up with my line. And I'm actually keeping my eye on top of the plate, and I'm keeping it in line so that if I look down the plate, it's going to line up with this saw mark that I want to actually cut. And so I can actually set this in here. It's going to be kind of odd for me because I'm in the way of a camera. But I can make a few strokes. See if I'm still on track because I got to look down the camera. And once I have a few strokes in, the saw starts to set itself in line. And now I'm basically at the mercy of the saw. The saw will continue along its line. And you can see I'm fairly close to my line still. I have a little bit of wiggle room that I can work with, but now if I keep this going, the saw will basically keep itself on track. As you can see here, I was a little bit off, and if you were looking at it with the camera, you would notice that I was aiming a little bit more to that side, but it stayed right on track with where it should be. And if the camera was in the way, I could probably get that a little closer, but oh well. So let me show some of the problems that some people have when trying to cut an angle. Now I have this right now, it's about 30 degrees out of perfectly vertical, and if I want to cut that line, what I end up doing with the saw is I have to lean the saw away. Now I still want to keep the saw 90 degrees to the face of the board. So when I'm cutting, I want to actually keep this at 90 degrees. I don't want to turn anything more like this. I want to keep the saw at 90 degrees to the face, but I want to turn the saw so that it is no longer 90 degrees to the edge of the board, and so that it's following along my line. So if I eyeball down it, this is where I'm going to be. Now one of the problems that people tend to have is that they might see as they're cutting halfway down that this side of the board I'm right on the line, but if I look around at the other side, I'm way off one way or the other. And what that is a problem is that your hand starts to drift one way or the other, side to side. So as you're cutting through, if your hand starts to move over, your blade will still be in line with the cut on this side, but on the other side you can see you're far ways off of that line. And that's where you start to lean one way or the other. Rather than fixing a mark as you're cutting through, you might find yourself off the mark. rather than fixing it by turning side to side, what you can actually do is fix it by turning the entire saw. And basically you're using the set of the teeth. In other words, the teeth are sticking out a little bit farther than the plate of the saw. You're using the side of the teeth to cut into one side or the other. And that is going to turn the entire cut together as opposed to turning it this way. So as you start to come out of the line on one side or the other, you want to actually think about turning it. So think about rolling your wrist as opposed to moving your wrist side to side. And a lot of that side to side movement is also in your body mechanics. Another problem that people are going to have when they're cutting is that their arm is not in line with the saw. And I kind of have the camera here to show you what I'm talking about. Is if your arm is out here like this, my arm is not in line with the saw, and you can kind of see there's an angle. My arm is aiming this way and my saw is aiming that way. And naturally I'm going to start to cut on the far side, I'm going to move that way, and on my close side, I'm going to move this way. Now my mind is going to try and keep me on this line that I'm watching, but when I move my head over to the other side to look at the other side of the board, I'm going to notice that I'm weaving off of the line over there. So you want to keep your arm in line with the saw so that you're pointing in the right direction, so something like that. Whereas if you start to tip it off one way or the other, you're going to then notice that you're leaving the line. That also means you have to move your body, so you have to step out of the way so that your arm can swing freely. Whereas if you are moving in line with the cut, then you're going to be pushing your arm out farther that way, and that's going to get you out of the cut line. It's one of those things that you just have to practice with and play with over time. But if you start it out right, just nicking a bit of a trough. Right now I'm keeping it in vertical, but then I actually want to turn it to that line, and I'm going to eyeball down the plate. Oop. And making sure I'm staying on that track, eyeballing down the plate. And then I can just keep going. Now I'm starting to establish the cut. I'm fairly well established. I can see that I'm getting off the line a little bit. I'm starting to move to this side. So rather than trying to twist the saw this way or that way, I'm going to try rolling it with my wrist to try and get it back in that line. And these teeth are going to be cutting just on the side, on this side of the cut and not on the other side of the cut. So it'll slowly turn. There we go. And that's how you can follow a line, even though it's a weird angle. Yes, it is going to feel weird. You're going to feel like you're kind of twisting your body to cut to that line. But it's much the same way. It's just something you don't get as much of a chance to practice with. There you go. I hope this made sense for you. It's kind of an odd thing to try and get the right camera to show how do you actually cut the angle and how do you keep the saw straight so that it is both plumb and square, even though the saw plate itself is not actually plumb to the earth, it's now plumb to the line you want to cut. I hope that made some sense. I'm sure there are a lot of questions. Feel free to ask them in the comments below. I'd love to answer them, and it might spawn a whole nother video on this. This was actually a knockoff of a video I did on cutting a straight line. Had a lot of questions on that, and so this came out of that video. If you'd like to see that video, there's a link in the description below. I hope you liked this. If you did, please hit like and go ahead and smash that subscribe button. I want to say an incredible thank you to the patrons on Patreon. You guys are the reason this channel is still here today. If you'd like to find out more about that, you can click the link over here. Also, if you like this video, feel free to check out one of my others. You might find something you like there. And until next time, have a wonderful day.